preparing this PowerPoint a couple of days ago, and I ran across this paper, and I thought it was very, very appropriate and timely for this pooled fund study. This was published this year. It really reveals the issue that we have at hand, not going away, and underscores the importance of this pooled fund study. Huge data set for over 400 studies, almost 35,000 individuals, 66 species, and a fourfold increase in about the last 25 years. But I wanted to go over the project nonetheless. What we're looking at is patterns and processes of elk vehicle collisions in the Central Canadian Rocky Mountains, primarily in Banff and Kootenay National Parks. These are unmitigated highways when the data was collected. Everybody's aware of the fencing and the crossing structures, but the data collection began in 1986 and went through 2000. So a really large data set, systematic roadkill data collection, not just on elk, but other species, but we use elk for this work, of course, on 4 different highway types. The elk vehicle collision data was specific to the sex or the gender of the elk, and also the age class, subadult or adult. Physical condition, bone marrow fat. I'll talk about that briefly as we get into the results. And then also adjacent to these areas where we were collecting the elk vehicle collision data, we had relative abundance estimates from spring and fall count. So quite fortunate to have this database. And these are some of the key findings that we found, that there were more females were involved in these collisions, but when numerically speaking, but when compared to the estimated abundance of those age and sex classes, males and subadults were more likely to be killed in vehicle collisions, occurring mostly during the fall season, which probably isn't a surprise to most people. The condition of the elk, as measured from percent fat marrow content, was greater for road and rail killed elk than predator killed elk, indicating that these weren't elk in poor condition that were killed on the highway or the railway, but they were actually quite healthy. And this is really an interesting result. I mean, again, it goes back to how fortunate we were to have this data in Banff. At that time, there was a half-time veterinarian who was doing necropsies and was able to collect this data on rail kill, road kill, and predator killed elk in the park for a long time. So there's a great data set to be able to contrast the condition of these elk that are being killed in the park ecosystem. The only other study that's really looked at this was one out of Montana, I think published in the 80s, and it found actually the opposite result. And in our paper, we discussed that. We think it's really due to the type of sampling that occurred in the Montana study, the timing of it, and actually where it occurred, specifically the timing, being primarily during the wintertime. But nonetheless, really interesting result. And last, the magnitude of the elk collisions were, in our study, was strongly correlated with traffic volumes, but elk abundance, how many elk there were really in these areas along these highways, was really the primary driver influencing the occurrence of collisions over this long time period. Some of the main results summarized with, that was that collectively these results are going to inform the design of mitigation measures targeting the most vulnerable demographics of a population. We know the demographic specific road mitigation efforts may be needed to reduce elk vehicle collision effects at a population level, and also really at an ecosystem level when we start thinking about predator-prey relationships. And declining elk vehicle collision rates occurred with increasing traffic volumes is an indicator of that a population may be on the decline. So patterns of traffic volume and abundance of elk, or the effect of elk abundance on elk vehicle collisions, can help managers really forecast the long-term viability of elk populations and assess when and where mitigation is going to be most effective for these targeted species. So collectively, these types of analyses that we were able to show in this work contribute to the design of mitigation strategies for the most vulnerable members of the population.